Here is the second part of the most horrifying teen inmates you don't want to meet. Are there any criminals you do want to meet? Comment down below. Number 10. Christopher Lee Simmons. When Christopher was 17, he convinced another younger boy to join him in a thrill murder. Simmons carefully planned out a robbery and murder of 46-year-old Shirley Crook over several weeks before trying to bring in other teen boys on his plan. Only one joined him, and together they broke into Shirley's home, robbed her, then blindfolded, gagged, and bound her before throwing her off the side of a bridge. Christopher was found the next day by police and was easily charged and convicted. The amount of evidence against Chris was staggering, and he pled guilty almost immediately. Christopher Simmons was a child of abuse and addiction. His stepfather was heavily abusive and addicted, and Simmons' mother lived in fear of her husband's wrath. By the time Christopher was a young teen, he was drinking hard spirits and a frequent user of multiple substances. Initially, Christopher was sentenced to death by a jury due to the premeditation and violence of the crime, but a psychological analysis from a psychiatrist revealing the depths of torment Christopher had endured was enough for his sentence to be commuted to one of lifetime imprisonment. Number 9. Alec Crater. Alec Crater was a teen going to school at Manheim Township High School in Pennsylvania. He was supposedly friends with Kevin Haynes, another student at the school. Alec, however, was deeply mentally disturbed. An official psychiatric diagnosis was not made, but Alec had a history of unpredictable violence and anger management issues, even trying to strangle his younger brother several years earlier. Early on the morning of May 12, 2007, Alec crept into his best friend's home and proceeded to murder his buddy Kevin, along with both of Kevin's parents, in a horrific spree that lasted several minutes. Unbeknownst to Crater, Kevin's sister Maggie Haynes had returned from college and was spending the night with her family. Maggie awoke early in the morning to a strong smell of blood and fled the house before calling the police. The police response was incredibly slow, and despite an officer being present just 4 miles away with no traffic blocks, it took almost 20 minutes after dispatch was called to have an officer on the scene. Alec's behavior was immediately clear to the investigators through the massive amount of blood prints that he left behind. Clearly, Alec's hands and feet were covered in blood. It took a month for investigators to finally find Alec, 2 days after he had confessed to the murders to his father. Alec was sentenced to life in prison without parole, and though no clear motive was found, Alec himself said that he despised happy people. Before his resentencing hearing, Alec would end his life in his cell. Number 8. Bronson Blessington. In 1988, Blessington and 4 other homeless Australian teens decided to commit a truly heinous crime. Described as a thrill murder, the 5 kidnapped Janine Balding, committed unspeakable acts before ending her life and dumping her in a dam reservoir. Janine had been chosen at random after the group had failed to get another young woman at the same park. Blessington was 14 when the crime happened and was sentenced along with most of the others to life imprisonment plus 25 years without the possibility of parole. In late October 2014, the United Nations Human Rights Committee ruled that Blessington's sentence breached the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. Following a 2016 review of the case, Blessington said he was very regretful and deeply ashamed that he had found God and was a changed man. However, the Balding family has never, before or since then, been sent any sort of apology. It is their view that Blessington, now 48, is simply trying to appear reformed. Regardless of the truth, Blessington is still in prison, and it seems he will stay that way. Number 7. Keaton Butter. Keaton was 16 when he was being driven home from a party by another partygoer. Suddenly, Keaton lunged with a knife at her and tried to slash her throat. This began an hours-long ordeal wherein he would stab his victim repeatedly and do other terrible acts. She managed to escape when he fell asleep after the assault, believing her to have passed. She ran for help and was rescued on the road. The victim survived, and so Keaton was charged with attempted murder and several other accounts of assault and SA. Keaton was sentenced to life without parole. However, just a few years later, Graham v. Florida would rule it unconstitutional to serve a juvenile a life without parole sentence for non-homicidal crimes. Despite this, the court simply resentenced Keaton to 3 life without parole sentences plus 20 years, which would amount to over 130 years behind bars. This was ruled also unconstitutional, and Butter is currently being resentenced to meet constitutional law. Number 6. Antonio Barbeau. In 2012, the sleepy county of Sheboygan was rocked by a vicious murder. A 78-year-old great-grandmother had been found by her daughter butchered in her garage. Her car was missing along with some jewelry and cash. It took several days before the full picture was revealed. Antonio Barbeau and his friend Nathan Pape had been dropped off by Antonio's mother at his great-grandmother's. Unbeknownst to his mother, Antonio had hidden a hatchet inside of his backpack. Pape had hidden a claw hammer. When they were dropped off, they attempted to sneak in but were seen by Antonio's great-grandmother. They then waited for her to turn her back before they attacked her with the weapons they brought and dragged her lifeless body into the garage. They then took $150, several pieces of jewelry, and the car and fled to a nearby bowling alley. They left the car and jewelry behind, hoping that someone would steal it and be implicated, and took their money to buy pizza and intoxicating herbs. The brutality and premeditation of the murder convinced the judge to try them as adults, and both were sentenced to life in prison. Barbeau would be around 24 years old now. Number 5. Christine Paulila. Paulila came from a broken home. Father had died when she was 2 from a construction accident, which sent her mother into a spiral of substance abuse. Eventually taken in by her grandmother, Paulila would soon after be diagnosed with alopecia, which caused her to lose all her hair, including eyebrows and eyelashes. Christine had to wear a wig to school and was frequently tormented and bullied. As well, she had poor vision and wore thick glasses, which she was also frequently bullied for. Paulila's mother recovered and was able to resume her parental duties, and the family moved to Clear Lake, Texas with a new stepfather. There at Clear Lake, Christine was befriended by 2 of the popular girls who helped her with her self-confidence and appearance, as well as helping her to integrate with the students of her new school. In 2003, at the age of 17, Paulila was voted Miss Irresistible by the student body. Things started looking up for Christine until she started dating 21-year-old Christopher Snyder. Snyder encouraged her to start taking numerous substances and was reportedly abusive and highly toxic. One night, Christine and Snyder decided to rob Christine's new friends for money for substances. However, a fight soon broke out. Christine and Christopher would end the lives of 4 people that night, including Christine's 2 best friends, one of whom Christine beat to death. Police didn't arrest them for 3 years, but eventually found them both and sentenced them. Paulila was spared the death penalty as she was a juvenile, but was sentenced to life in prison for 4 counts of aggravated murder. Number 4. Sean Sellers. On March 5th, 1986, Sean Sellers would sneak into the upstairs of his home and end the lives of both of his parents with a lethal weapon. First ending his stepfather's life, which awoke his mother, before quickly ending her life as well. These horrific murders seemed to have no basis or justification. However, it was later revealed that Sean was an avowed Satanist and had read the Satanic Bible by Anton Levy several times. He also claimed that demonic possession by the demon Ezerate had driven him to commit the murders. These weren't the first murders Sean had committed, however. In 1985, he had ended the life of a Circle K store clerk after he refused to sell Sellers beer. Sellers then returned with a weapon and ended the clerk's life. It's believed that following this first murder at 16, Sellers became more and more enraptured by the occult and the feelings of power that murder gave him. Sellers was sentenced by a jury to death at 18. While in prison, he claimed to have been reformed and found God, and repeatedly attempted to have his execution commuted to a life sentence on the grounds of his conversion, even having friends start a website on his behalf to help campaign for clemency. But no one, aside from Sellers' step-grandfather and the prison chaplain, believed the conversion to actually be legitimate, and Sellers was executed at the age of 29. Number 3. Walter H. Bork Jr. Bork is now known as the longest-serving prisoner in New Hampshire. In December of 1955, he was sentenced to 99 years and 6 months in prison for the murder of a young girl. Bork had violated the girl, and when she threatened to tell her parents, he grabbed an axe and ended her life. This grisly murder was committed when he was just 17 years old enough to know what he was doing, but young enough to be sentenced as a minor. Bork then buried her in her parents' basement before going home and trying to forget the whole ordeal. Details around his arrest and trial are slim, but it's believed he was arrested in fairly short order. At his trial, prosecutors pushed for the death penalty, but as he was a minor, the jury found him guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced him to 18 years in prison. When his first parole period came up, he was denied on the grounds of the brutality of his crime. He was transferred to a minimum security prison in 1977 for preparation to be released, but was accused of inappropriate interactions with minors. He also stole a check during this period, and so was sentenced to to more time in prison. In 1999, he was told he would be released upon the completion of an offender rehabilitation program, but he was never assessed for his ability to be rehabilitated, and so was left in prison. He has stayed there since and has resigned himself to being institutionalized. He is now 85. Number 2. Patrick Nogueira. Patrick Nogueira was born to wealthy parents in Brazil and was bullied heavily as a child. First, he turned to violence before turning to drinking to deal with his anger. By 15, he was drinking a bottle a day, and by 18, he was vomiting blood from a stomach ulcer. At 17, he stabbed his teacher in Brazil for implying he was gay, for which he served 45 days in youth detention and 6 months of mandated therapy. After his treatment, he moved to Europe on his father's money with the dream of being a professional footballer. He played for a season with England, but was kicked from the team due to his drinking problem. Following that, he moved in with his aunt, uncle, niece, and nephew in Madrid, Spain. He hardly interacted with them and generally had a contentious relationship until the family moved to Piotr and he moved to a different section of Madrid. Nogueira's uncle threatened him with calling the police to deport him when his 3-month visa was up, and it's believed that this motivated him to commit the murders. At 19, Nogueira got on a bus with 2 pizzas and headed to his uncle's house. When he got there, he gave the pizzas to his aunt, niece, and nephew before ending their 3 lives rapidly with a knife. He then waited for his uncle to come home before taking his life as well. Nogueira escaped back to Brazil before he was connected to the murder, but due to an international investigation, he decided to return to Spain for incarceration rather than be interred in the more brutal Brazilian prisons. Number 1. Elmer Wayne Henley. Henley was born in 1956 to an abusive father and a mother who tried her best to give her children the best education in life she could, given the circumstances. Henley was a brilliant student, but following his parents' divorce, he was forced to take up a series of menial jobs to help his mother pay the bills. This caused his grades to drop off sharply. At 15, he dropped out of high school and would accrue a minor criminal record for possession of a lethal weapon and robbery in 2 separate years. While still in school, Henley met Dean Brooks, who introduced him to the older Dean Corll. Dean began to prepare Henley to be his accomplice. First, they went on a spree of burglaries, and at one point, Corll asked Henley if he would be willing to commit murder, to which Henley replied yes. Corll offered Henley $200 for bringing a boy over. Corll was a mass murderer and deviant, and had been responsible for the abductions and murders of numerous other young men in the area. Corll soon told Henley that he had murdered at least 5 of Henley's friends and stashed their bodies in a boat shed by the water. Henley was involved in the kidnappings and murders of at least a half-dozen boys before the fateful August 8th party. Under the pretense of hosting a party, Henley brought 19-year-old Timothy Curley and 15-year-old Rhonda Williams. Corll was incensed that Henley had brought a girl into his home and drugged all 3 of them, including Henley. Henley later awoke while being handcuffed and managed to convince Corll to set him free before ending Corll's life in self-defense. Immediately after ending the life of the mass murderer who he had helped, Henley called the police and turned himself in. Henley was sentenced to 6 consecutive 99-year prison sentences and is still imprisoned.